welcome to Good Grief, a podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And today we have a very special guest episode. I had a lovely conversation with Pamela Topjian. Pamela is a hypnotherapist in Northern California, and she has been put through the ringer, so to speak. She has suffered multiple losses and some tumultuous marriages and came out on top. So I really wanted her to come on and share her story with all of you for several reasons. We do talk about loss and grief, but also she is one of those beautiful, shining examples I have of, I always say you don't get over your grief, but you learn to work with it, and it improves you, and and it shapes who you are as a person. And she's one of those beautiful stories where she, went through hell and back basically and came out on top. And she is doing very well now and is so happy and used all of her experiences to discover herself and all of this. So, and before we go into that interview, just a couple quick things. First of all, I want to apologize to Pamela. I had a ton of technical difficulties during this interview, so there's some bits that were cut off, so you might hear some weird edits that don't sound quite right. That's me. That is totally my fault. I was having internet issues, technical difficulties, everything else in the world. Like it was, and also I realized after we got off the call and I was like, oh, that was great. I totally forgot to do the death deck with her. So Pamela and all my listeners, I'm so sorry. There's no death deck question in this episode. So sorry about that. But a huge thank you to Pamela. I will just turn it over and let you listen to our talk now. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. Today, I have a very special guest, Pamela Topjian. Did I say that right? I just asked you like 2 seconds ago.
Topjian. Yep.
Topjian. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Pamela found me on Reddit, and I was very interested to hear sounds like she's been through the gamut. So I'm just going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself, Pamela, and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm Pamela Topjian. I'm in Northern California, and I am a former nurse, now a hypnotherapist. And I grew up, one of the main reasons I'm here, I think, is, I grew up without a father, and there's a lot of grief around that. Just, grieving the loss of a childhood, really, because then that was in the 70s, and my mother had two other daughters, and one that had passed away as a teen due to a car accident. And so just a lot of grief and losses in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. It sure sounds that way.
Yeah.
Well, first off, I'm very sorry for your losses. Tell me a little bit about your sister.
Yeah, so she was 5 years older than me, and she was 18, and she died in a car accident. And it was just a couple days before I turned 14. And like I said, my father wasn't around in our lives, so my mother had to work a lot. I really was alone a lot, and she was 5 years older, so she was already a teenager when my parents divorced, and I was a little kid. And so she was, kind of a wild card a little bit out there without any supervision or anything. And we lived in Illinois at the time, in suburbs of Chicago is where I grew up. And she was in a car accident. So she was out.
Oh, wow.
I don't know, I don't know. She was out, but it was in Indiana that the car rolled over. It was in a Jeep. And this was 1980. So there were no seatbelt laws. And it was one of those Jeeps that was not covered.
Yeah.
She was an itty bitty little thing, probably 100 pounds, maybe 100, little over 100. So she was flown from the Jeep, and they said it rolled over her and crushed her. And so she was kind of dead on impact. And so we got the call, went to the hospital. And, I was, like I said, I was 2 days from 14. It was just a whirlwind of not knowing what was going on, really. And, my mother, of course, was, in hysterics.
Sure.
And my father was there, which to me at that time, we hadn't seen him in a long time, and I was kind of surprised to see him at the hospital, and I was even more surprised to see my parents embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of interesting, and it still kind of strikes me today because they always fought when we were young, and he wasn't in the picture most of my life. And that just kind of goes to show that was their child together,
Yeah.
regardless of anything else,
Mm-hmm.
they they're the ones who made her,
Yeah.
and so they embraced. And another thing from at the hospital that's really affected my life, through that death was one of my mother's friends told me, she sat me down and she pointed right in my face and she said, Don't you cry. Don't you cry. You be strong for your
Oh,
mother. Don't you cry.
no,
I know how
no.
terrible. I know.
Oh,
So
what a,
terrible to say to a kid. Yeah.
especially somebody so young. Oh my
Yeah. And
gosh.
it affected the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Even today, I have trouble like showing emotion, and it's kind of a
Yeah.
big thing I'm working on.
Ugh.
But yeah, so then later that day and like throughout the next, I don't know how long, they were worried about me because
Well,
I wasn't crying, and I was kind of not only
oh,
stoic, but I was almost like in shock.
yeah. Oh, sure, sure. That
Yeah,
would be normal
totally
too.
shut
So,
down, right?
yeah. So was that your first like real significant loss, I would assume?
I would say so. Yeah, because my grandparents were both still alive at that point, I believe. So I have my father is Armenian, so I'm half Armenian and half German because we never learned anything about that part of our family, that part of our heritage. My grandmother, his mother, was schizophrenic and only spoke Armenian, and so we
Oh,
really didn't
wow.
have any relationship there. So that's a big part of the loss to me is the loss of not ever having that conversation with him, with my
Mm-hmm.
father. I mean, and before he died, I mean, he did
Yeah.
pass away, but not until much later.
Okay.
So you were asking, so the question was about that my sister being the first major loss, but yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking my grandparents were still alive and my parents were still alive. And um, that's another thing too. I know we were discussing was my mother is in the beginning stages of dementia now,
Right.
and it's another thing that is like really difficult because I definitely she's not the same person, and I feel like I've lost her already, but she's still alive.
Yeah.
And it really kind of hit me hard because I worked with a lot of people with Alzheimer's. I worked in Alzheimer's unit, and I thought that if that was to happen in my life with my mother, that I would have a little more, it would be much easier on me than just these,
Yeah.
most other people. But
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
surprise, surprise.
Yeah. I get that a lot. A lot of people ask me how I can handle doing my work as a death doula and how it doesn't get to me. And I'm as gentle as possible. I tell them, this
Yeah,
isn't my mother. This isn't my father. It's not,
right.
it doesn't make it less impactful. But after your sister passed away after her tragic accident,
hmm
what was your family dynamic like? Because I'm assuming it was just you and your mom at that point, then, correct?
I have another sister.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And she's just a year younger than the sister that passed away. So she's
Okay.
4 years older than me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just my mother and my sister and myself. And we, from the time I was 9 until, later in my teen years, we moved a lot. We
Hmm.
were in poverty. We were evicted sometimes, almost always hungry. Just really had, my father was not in the picture, not
Hmm.
only physically, but he didn't offer any financial support either.
Oh.
And that's at a time, in the 70s and early 80s, I think, it was before any deadbeat dad, type of
Hmm.
laws that were in place. And, he's
Yeah.
one of the reasons that they put those laws in place.
Yep.
So, yeah,
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. So your dad was not in the picture then.
right.
And tell me a little bit about how that impacted your views and, everything. Because it sounds like that was, very impactful in your life to not have him or,
Yeah.
that type of figure in your life. So tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
So I've had two abusive marriages, and I feel
Gosh.
like I know. See, I wrote my memoir,
Oh,
and this is why you keep hearing all
yeah.
these things that my life has been
Good
through.
Lord.
It gets better though.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, I'm here, I'm
Yeah.
happy, so I have
Yeah.
a great big breakthrough after a major breakdown. But
Oh, wow.
so I love my life now, so it's
Okay.
awesome.
Well, good. Good to
Yes, I
hear.
just want to put that out there.
Okay.
It's not all a big sob story.
Oh, geez. Okay. Well,
But so yeah,
continue.
so my so not having my dad around was I really feel like I'm not a person to blame anybody or blame
Hmm.
situations or anything, but if you can go down to, what was the main thing, if you go down to all the circumstances, I believe that
Hmm.
it is not having my father there, which
Sure.
was a big part of, most of the trauma in my life,
Hmm.
not having any kind of father figure at all, and as far as advice,
Yeah.
supervision, anything like that, or even any connection with any kind of male figure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I've talked with a lot of people that really shapes their life where they're missing one or the
Yeah,
other of their parent. And
sure.
I mean, even in the aspect of, of their parent passed away versus
Hmm.
just was not present, but either one of those,
Right.
just missing one of your parents can really impact a lot of,
Yeah.
obviously. I'm so sorry to hear about your prior marriages.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
The marriages
Yeah.
or
You don't have to.
I can.
I mean, if
Um,
you wrote your memoir, you kind of put it
yeah,
out there. So I
right.
feel like
It's
I'm
out
okay to
there.
ask,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
anything I
Yeah,
ask,
it's
you're
all
allowed to
out
tell
there.
me no.
It's all out there. Um, so the first marriage, so I was a teen mother,
Mhm.
first of all. And my first marriage is not from that relationship, but so I was in my early 20s as normal, as usual, I should say, for someone getting married the first time. And I was kind of, ready to have a sibling for my son and
Mhm.
ready to kind of not necessarily settle down, but just kind of like I was really striving to have that normalcy of a regular family life. And I only
Yeah.
realized this later that that was partially, I wanted to give that to my son, who was about 4 or 5 at that time. But also, I know that for myself, I was really searching to, get kind of in a regular, I hate to use the words like normal and regular, but to get
Right.
into a more typical family scenario,
Hmm.
situation, life.
Yeah.
So I married, even though there were red flags, even though, I knew probably, well, I don't know that I knew at that time, but I just didn't know myself very well through the
Hmm.
childhood that I had. I didn't know myself
Right.
very well. But so he was abusive in the way of only emotional abuse,
Okay.
verbal abuse, very controlling,
Okay.
um, which of course, and I feel like, again, talking about going back to not having a father, I feel like, of course, you would be with somebody that's controlling,
Yeah.
because you don't know yourself.
Yeah.
I never knew how to stand up for myself, set boundaries, or, any of that.
Hmm.
But I was with him for 15 years and we had a daughter together. And my relationship with her is great. And she had a
Good.
wonderful childhood.
Good. That's good.
Yeah. And my son mostly did as well. So that's good. But when I divorced him, so finally I had went to nursing school about 13, 14 years in, um, and really gained some confidence there and really felt like I might be able to make it on my own.
Good.
And I left him, but I, yeah, I
Uh-oh.
jumped, I like to say that I got out of jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, an old boyfriend, or, I don't know if he was really even a boyfriend, but somebody that I knew
Hmm.
as a teen came back into my life, was also divorcing. We got married within a year and we hadn't been in touch for 30 years. I didn't know this
Wow.
man at all. I was just going back to, I thought that it was familiarity,
Hmm.
somebody that I was comfortable with and felt that I knew well,
Yeah.
and I didn't at all.
Oh.
And So then I married him and he was a drunk. And later
Oh
on,
my
I found
gosh.
out he was a drug addict as well.
Oh,
And he was, it got worse and worse and worse. We were together for eight
yeah.
years. And, um, at first it was all kinds of not keeping jobs
Yeah.
and, the alcohol use and the drug use, which I didn't really know about the drug use, but looking back, I can remember times that he was really off and it just was like, well, I don't know what's going on with him.
Hmm.
Um, and then that got worse to where he was in and out of mental health, facilities and that. And I
Oh,
thought that maybe he
geez.
had like late onset schizophrenia, early onset
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. And I was a nurse at that time and I was taking care of, all of the bills, working 12, 16-hour shifts. Um, and he was just really going crazy at home, and not being
Oh,
safe or anything either.
yeah.
So eventually, so when he did get physical with me, I ended up having to call the police to get out,
Good.
and that's when I left and divorced. And when I divorced, I had found out that he had been married 6 times
Oh my God.
before, and I didn't know that. So
Oh
yeah,
no.
so I really
No.
think that I do seriously believe that the common denominator, the thing that led up to
Yeah.
this, if there is one thing, is not really having a father figure in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And nobody can
Yeah,
fault you for that. You were craving that family dynamic that you didn't have
yeah.
when you were young. So, and yeah, nobody can fault you for that whatsoever. And if they do, they're poop heads. So says I.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh my gosh. So, how old were your kids at this point when in the second marriage? Were
So
they
they
adults or were they still in the home?
so my son was an adult and he was already, off on his own.
Okay.
My daughter was 14, I believe,
Oh,
when I had
wow.
divorced my first husband,
Okay.
and she ended up staying living with him. And
Okay.
I was having her come, and then it kind of blew up on us. And it was a good
Gotcha.
thing that she didn't,
Yeah.
that we kind of lost, touch there for a little while. Um, and looking back, I mean, the situation that it was, it's a good thing. I mean, we have a great relationship now. So,
Good.
but
Good.
yeah, so because I had went to nursing school just before I left the first husband when she was at an age that she could come home from school and be home,
Hmm.
alone for a little bit, or she didn't need as much of my attention, that I
Okay.
could study and do what I needed to do and go to the clinicals
Sure.
and everything. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So,
so you lose your sister very young. You have a not great first marriage. It sounds like an even worse second marriage.
right, right.
Where did this all leave you at this point? Your second marriage is now done. You've been through about everything somebody can go through. Where did this put you, like mentally, emotionally, everything at this point?
Yeah. So that's when I had a big mental breakdown. I
Yeah.
really did. And I thought that, oh, good. Now everything's going to be great. I'm never getting married again. I'm done with that. I don't believe in it at that point. But I was
Right.
having, PTSD symptoms and I didn't
Yeah.
realize what it was at the time.
Hmm.
I thought now everything's going to be awesome. And I spiraled downward
Yeah.
and it shocked me. My own feelings shocked me because I was like, why is this happening now? Everything's great now.
Hmm.
But I got to the point where I was suicidal. I was fearful all the time. I had nightmares and even night terrors.
Yeah.
I couldn't work. I was barely functioning. And so then I had a friend that was very anxious and depressed as I
Hmm.
was, and going through a lot of the similar kinds of things that we would talk. And they were moving to California. So I was in Missouri at this point. And they were like, I have a friend in California that said, why don't you come here and restart your life? And, you've got nothing to lose. And I wasn't going to go to their friend's house because I didn't know them. But
Hmm.
he said to me, "Why don't you? maybe you want to go somewhere where you could start fresh.
Yeah.
And I was really kind of numb. I wasn't really socializing. I was trying to hold on to a job. I was working, but my life was really spiraling downward. And like I said, I was suicidal, and I thought, I've got nothing to lose. So I told my landlord that I might be moving before the lease was up. And they said to me, "Can you be out in 2 weeks?" Because we were thinking of selling the place anyway.
Oh, okay.
Right. So I'm like, well, I'll try.
Yay. Wow.
So it gave me something to do, something to focus on,
Hmm.
and a little bit of
Yeah.
hope. Um,
Okay.
and the only reason that I hadn't, the suicidal thoughts didn't really win over was mainly because my mother had already lost my sister, and I didn't
Yeah.
want to do that to her.
Yeah.
So more so than my children, because at the time I thought I'm just bringing them down, this depressed
Hmm.
mom, and
Hmm.
they're adults, they were doing fine, and um, so for me it was mainly my mother that kept me
Yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a history with mental illness and
mm,
suicidal ideations as well. And
yeah,
my only brother passed away in 2015. So a lot of what
yeah,
goes through my head when I start getting those places, very similar thing. It's like I can't do that to my parents. And I
right,
feel bad.
right,
Like obviously I have a husband, I love him dearly. I wouldn't want to do
right.
that to him either, but it feels
But that's
like
the
that's
main thing.
the
Yeah,
main thing I think of. So yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah.
put myself in that, but
No, no, absolutely. And I'm sorry for your loss as
thank
well,
you.
but
Thank you.
yeah. Well, so then
Yeah.
so then I got on a
Yeah,
bus
yeah.
and took a 3-day ride to California with a one-way ticket.
Oh, wow.
And I was just, I was really just numb. I was just numb. I didn't know what
Sure.
to expect on the other side. I didn't know what I
Yeah.
was doing. I didn't care. A lot of people said I was brave or, took a lot of courage or weren't you scared? But I
Mm,
was just, so
yeah.
close to, you know, not feeling like I cared about my life at all, really. It's like,
Right.
I only care what happens to me on this
Yeah.
bus,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
yeah.
wow. So what was awaiting for you in California, or what did life look like when you got there?
Well, so I was still, in a very terrible state of mind.
Sure.
I had found, I don't know if you know, when you're a nurse, you can't just go work in another state with your
Right. Yeah.
license.
Hmm.
You have to, it's a whole big process to get the license in another state.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wasn't ready to do that kind of thing, to jump right back into that.
Hmm.
Um, so I got some jobs that were like live-in caretaker jobs, whether it was for long-term pet taking, pet sitting and house sitting, and then
Yeah.
caring for elderly that just kind of, were still living in their home, but you couldn't really live alone.
Hmm.
So those kinds of things. I took a few of those kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
And so then eventually, so I did get some therapy,
Good.
and yeah, so I went to a doctor, actually, a medical doctor, and I couldn't sleep. I was so anxious. I was having migraines at the time,
Mhm.
and I thought I was going to get something for anxiety or something to maybe help me sleep, and they suggested this therapist. So
Okay.
yeah, so that was the beginning of my coming back up.
You're rising from the ashes,
Yes,
so to
yes.
speak.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. And yeah, I would have the same reaction with you leaving for Cal. Like, that's so brave. What a great way to get a fresh start. But I also having obviously I haven't been through what you've been through, but having, I've had some mental health crises as well. And coming out of
Mhm.
that, it's like you don't it's, you don't think that. It's just like
No,
I don't really care what happens at this point.
exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what you're going through with your mom right now, if you don't mind, with her
Yeah. Yeah.
dementia. Is it
Yeah, absolutely.
Alzheimer's? Is it full
It
Alzheimer's or
has
just
no,
not
not
progressed? Okay.
yet.
Okay.
Not yet. It's just the beginning stages of dementia.
Okay.
And I talk to her once a week. So she's in Missouri, I'm in California.
Okay.
Um, they just recently started getting home health to come in, and my stepfather,
Hmm.
who she didn't marry until after I was married, um, but they get home health in, but because of the stepfather, not for her.
Oh,
And
okay.
she's at the point where some people are fooled by her. You know? And she
Really?
tries to put up a good front. She tries to
Okay.
pretend that she remembers or she agrees or
Hmm.
but anytime that I visited her and we go to the store, people will say hi and she's like, "Oh, hi, I don't remember your name, but hi," and they
Yeah.
laugh it off and people around her know.
Yeah.
But she has a real close-knit community. She's really involved in her church and people are always offering to help. And so my stepfather is, he's declining physically, but his mind
Okay.
is still sharp.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
That's an
she's,
interesting
I,
duo there.
Yeah, and I can't speak to her about things that I'm doing or things in my
Yeah.
life. I don't think that she really would understand or know. So
Okay.
I still do a lot of pet sitting because I just love it so much. And
Yeah.
so that's like what I talk to her about. She can understand the dogs and the cats and the
Hmm.
birds, you know.
Yeah.
But to try to talk to, I'm a hypnotherapist. I had quit nursing when I came to California and after a couple of years I quit nursing.
Yeah.
um but I can't talk to her about that. She doesn't really get
Sure.
it.
Sure.
And I think she probably thinks I'm still a nurse, but I'm not.
Yeah.
And yeah, so she's kind of gone as far as I talk to her about the weather,
Hmm.
and the cats and the dogs and
Yeah.
I just, I'm getting new glasses next week, Mom, and I don't want her to feel bad about my childhood. And there's a
Yeah.
lot in there that she doesn't even know, and she would feel terrible about if she knew. And
Yeah.
so I've kind of kept that from her. But I feel like now, even if I told her, I don't think she would get it. I don't think it would process in her mind that I wrote a memoir. She used to be a big reader. She's not anymore, of course.
Yeah.
So, just a few years ago, I could have, if I was going to tell her, um, she would want to read it. She would understand what that meant. But now I don't think she'd even know what that means.
Wow.
And we used to be pretty close, although I've always protected her. So I think part of that probably is, the don't you cry, you be strong for your mother. That's probably
Yeah.
a big part of that.
Oh.
But when my parents were married and I was just a little kid, they would yell at each other. My mother would go sit out on the porch and smoke, and I would go sit next to her and I would tell her, "Why don't you divorce him? Just divorce." And I'm this little kid. And I could see that, she would just cry and smoke. And after
Oh.
being inside yelling back and forth with him, and I
Hmm.
had friends whose parents had divorced and they were living a great life, like they had two homes and two bedrooms and it was all the extra, everything extra, it worked the other way for me,
Two
but I didn't.
birthdays, two Christmases. Yeah.
Exactly.
I had
Exactly.
some friends of divorced marriages when I was little too. I'm like, oh, you could have Christmas twice.
Right, right.
Obviously, I would not change my family for that, but
Yeah.
anyway.
So I was like, divorce him. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But so yeah, so
Yeah.
I've always kind of been felt a little bit protective over her. And my sisters were, like I said, they were young teens and she
Hmm.
would be, upset by them a lot of the time. And I always thought to myself, I'm never gonna upset her. I don't want to
Yeah.
make mom cry.
Yeah.
Um, so and then that solidified it with my sister dying and that her friend telling me not to cry. So I've always been kind of a protector of my mother in that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it kills me when people, I had a whole podcast episode on what not to say to people who are grieving and
Yeah.
one about talking to children too. And like when people
Mm.
tell little kids like don't cry or you're the man of
Oof.
the house now when the kid's
Oh,
like
yeah.
7. Oh my God, don't kids
Right.
don't have the same brain function we
Right.
do. Don't tell them that. They're going to take it so literally.
Right. Right. And they'll remember that forever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's oh, I know. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, I'm so sorry that stuck with you, but I would have the same reaction probably. So,
Yeah.
and that's like when I lost my brother, I had an interesting conversation with somebody else who lost a stepchild.
Mm.
And when people come up to you when there's been a loss and they're asking about like, how are your parents? How are his kids?
Yeah.
And nobody's asking how you are.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. And you don't in the moment, you're not like, wow, F you, I'm a person
Right.
too. You're like, okay, yeah, yeah, I guess their grief is more important than mine.
Hmm.
And that's hard. It dismisses
Yeah.
your grief for sure. So
Yeah, and I don't think that you even think that to yourself. You don't, it's
yeah.
just subconsciously in there, like,
Yep.
oh, yeah, that's more important than how I'm
Yeah.
feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I had a lot of that. People would ask me how my parents were doing or how my brother's
Hmm.
kids were doing or his
Right.
ex-wife and everything. And it was just like, oh yeah. Yeah. And I would give the update as best I could,
Right.
but it didn't hit me till later. I'm like, no, like very few people asked how
Yeah.
I was doing.
Right. Right.
So it's and you that yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No, important stuff for sure.
Absolutely. So always people listening, remember that.
Yeah,
Remember that. Okay, so you have written a memoir
I
now.
have.
All this.
Yeah.
So tell us just a little bit about that.
So it's called I Didn't Come This Far to Only Come This Far.
Ooh, I like that.
And yeah, I love that
I
too.
like that. That's
Um,
fun. Okay.
so yeah, I started writing it when I was in therapy after I came to California, and I was really just writing it to get my thoughts in order to kind of see where how my life had been up to that point and how it got there.
Hmm.
Because I was very confused about it all. The therapist had said, use the word neglect and had used the words, CPTSD, and I didn't really understand all of that. And so I started just writing it all out. And it was
Okay.
kind of, I didn't know it was going to be published. I didn't plan on publishing it. And I also was writing it out partially to be a sort of a record for my children because my father had passed away. I was never able to get from him about the family dynamic,
Hmm.
or his family, that side of the family. And I thought, not necessarily like a suicide note, but kind of like just so everybody would know from my perspective and my experiences what happened,
Yeah.
this whole life of
Yeah.
trauma, really. Um, and so they would know what happened
Hmm.
eventually if the suicidal thoughts won out.
Yeah.
But then when things started getting better, and I was reading some other memoirs as I was writing mine, and I realized like some of the feelings and the thoughts that people had, it helped me to not feel so alone. So I thought
Yeah.
that would be good for other people for whatever they're going through or have went through, to know that they're not alone. And then eventually, coming out of that and really healing mentally,
Yeah.
people need to know that it's
Yes.
possible, because so many people get stuck in those
Hmm.
feelings, and it's possible to come out of it and love yourself and love your life, and
Yeah.
so that's why I decided to publish it so that people could know that it can and it does get better.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't have said that better myself.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason I do this podcast is if
Yeah.
every episode one person picks one little nugget that's like, oh, oh, somebody else has felt this. I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Right, right.
Then my job is done. That's all I want to do with this podcast is to make
Yeah,
people feel a little less alone. So
exactly.
obviously I'm sorry you had to go through everything you went through. That's terrible. But to be able to take that and not just drown in that for the rest of your life, but
Yeah.
to use it as a tool to help other people is like it's amazing. So thank you for sharing your story with your
Yeah.
book and with me and everything.
Yeah. I feel like it's only been a few years that I say now that I wouldn't change a thing.
Hmm.
Not too long ago I would have said, yeah, I maybe wouldn't have married the first husband, or maybe
Hmm.
not married the second one, or I would have handled things differently at this point in my life, or this point in my life, or this point in my life.
Yeah.
But now I'm glad almost,
Yeah.
I'm proud of the experiences and so much that I've learned from it that has helped me to delve deeper into myself and to understand myself and to
Yes.
understand life a little better. And, as I said, I'm a hypnotherapist, and I feel like now I have much better empathy.
Hmm.
I can relate with people, and I've had people come to me because they've read the book and they know that I've been through it. They know
Yeah.
that I understand some of where they're at in their life.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, thank you for saying you wouldn't change anything. Like
Yeah,
that sounds weird when people who have been through a lot say that, but
right.
I'm constantly saying on this podcast how grief shapes who we are. Our
Yeah.
losses, our traumas, like obviously they're not pleasant, but they do shape who we are and who we become. And
Yes.
it's what we do with those that
Yes.
matters,
I don't
So
think I would be the person I am today
right.
had I not been through every little thing that I have. And
Yeah.
I love the person I am today. And I love my life today. And I don't
Yeah.
think that I would be here had any of those things didn't
Yeah.
happen.
And sometimes it takes a significant loss or grief or, some type of trauma to force us to turn inward a little bit and
Yeah.
re-examine who we are as people and learn who we are, because we may not know ourselves,
Right.
especially when it comes to, family dynamics that aren't,
Hmm.
what they could be, or traumatic marriages.
Yeah.
When that's gone, trying to realize I'm not that person's wife. I'm my own
Right.
individual, but I don't know who I am. So taking that,
Exactly.
so yeah, and it sounds like you did all that. So kudos to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry you had to go through all that to get there, but again, like you said, you wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change
Right.
any of the things I've been through either, because they've
Right.
made me where I am today. And I too love where I'm at. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great place to be.
yeah. Anything else you would like to share with us? Any other stories or
I got a lot of
anecdotes?
stories.
I don't doubt. Well, I'll tell you what then. Tell everybody where they can find your book.
So it's easier to put my name, Pamela Topjian, Topjian,
I'll
in the
put it in the
Amazon
show notes
search.
too.
Okay. So in the Amazon search, put my
Okay.
name rather than the name of the book because it was just published January of 2022. Um,
Okay.
so it's just past a year. And so, yeah, it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle. You can get it in paperback or, like I said, or Kindle. And
Cool.
yeah, I didn't come this far to only come this far.
I
And I
like
still
it.
feel that. It's like a mantra, like anything that I'm doing, it's like, I still feel that kind of push to, almost make up for lost time.
Yeah. Yeah. I will go get my copy, and I will encourage my listeners to do the same.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes to anybody who
Okay.
wants to find that. So I will do that so they don't have to search too hard.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
is there anything else you would like? Do you have like socials or your own podcast or anything you would like to?
I certainly do not have a
Okay.
podcast. It's
Feels
not
like
something
everybody does, so I have to say
I know.
it.
But it's not something I'm really that interested in. I love being a guest and
It's a
sharing.
lot of work. It's a
It
lot
is
of
a
work.
lot of work. And so I just, my hypnobreakthrough.com is my website for
Awesome.
hypnotherapy.
Awesome.
And Hypno Breakthrough on, Instagram and Facebook. Um, I don't know, I don't really normally give out my personal accounts, but it's just
And you don't
Pamela
have to.
Topchian. But yeah,
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time and your willingness to share this story with me and my listeners.
yes, my honor. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, another big thank you to Pamela for coming on my show. I hope you enjoyed that. I will link her website for her hypnotherapy practice and for her book in the show notes, so please check those out. I just got my digital copy of her book. Can't wait to start reading it. And I also want to give a quick shout out and thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, 100% online. And with BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 25,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. To get started, you just answer a few questions about your needs and preferences, and BetterHelp will match you with the perfect therapist from their network just for you. You can talk to your therapist however you're comfortable. If it's via text, chat, phone call, video call, you can message your therapist at any time and schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you. And if for any reason you're not happy with your therapist, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you will get the same professionalism and quality you would expect from in-office therapy, but with a therapist custom-picked for you with more scheduling flexibility and a more affordable price. In fact, you can get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Nikki the Death Doula. So that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Nikki the Death Doula. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please follow me on Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening. Leave a review, leave a comment. Tell me what you thought about the show. I like hearing from my listeners. And you can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. My social handles are all Nikki the Death Doula, so you can find me on any of those. Please feel free to follow, comment, have a little conversation. I would say let me know your answer to the death deck question, but as we know, I forgot. So, my bad. And if you really enjoy the show and you want to help support me, please visit me at patreon.com/NikkiTheDeathDoula. And yeah, the funds from there go to pro bono work so that I can provide help to those who cannot afford my services. That's it. Have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, as always, your grief is yours, your feelings are valid, and grief doesn't always have to suck.